This is a bit of a long show, so I'm going to try and work through it as quickly as I can, so we still have time for questions at the end. Okay, so let's jump right in. So this is just a brief introduction to the owls in Southern Ontario. The different species, some of their behaviors and some of their habits, and most importantly, what you can do to help owls. This is an important question because, you know, everybody, I know there's a lot of people here and I've given this presentation before, and it seems that owls are a big draw. And so let's think about why they're so special. I think part of it is that they're nocturnal, usually, not always, but often they are nocturnal and solitary. So they're difficult to find as well. They're kind of interesting because they have asymmetrical ears. So the ears are not on opposite sides of their head. They're kind of skewed a bit so that they can get more of a 3D sound. And their feathers are adapted for silent flight, which is really interesting. I do volunteer at the Owl Foundation, and for people that make or adopt an owl there, they do get an invite in the fall to come and visit the facility. And we often, if a owl flies in the cage, you won't hear a thing, which is really interesting and not so interesting for their prey, because that's how they can zone in and grab them before they even know what's happening. They also have this unique ability to rotate their heads 270 degrees without cutting off the blood supply to their brain. So if we tried that, we'd choke, basically. So they do have 14 neck vertebrae. So that makes their necks more flexible, but they also have an opening in the vertebrae that are about 10 times the diameter of the artery, which allows them to be able to twist their head and be able to get that wide view, 270 degrees. Some owls are almost the same size as their prey. In some species of owls, the female sits on the eggs in the nest and the male brings her food, and later also for the nestlings. In some cultures, they are associated with death, wisdom, or being a messenger. So there's all sorts of folklore and stories about owls across many different cultures. But I think the big attraction, I think, for owls is that they're simply mysterious. We don't know, the beginning birder especially doesn't know much about them and where to look for them. And they're always really excited when they see their first owl. Another interesting thing about owls is, like most raptors, the females are larger than the males. And there's many theories. No one knows for sure why that is, but some theories say that a smaller male is more agile, and that's an advantage when hunting small prey. Some theories state that the females have a larger mass to allow them to go for longer periods of time without starving. So if there isn't enough food, then they can make it longer. And so how this session is going to go is I'm going to play some songs, and I think I can see the chat. Actually, I cannot see the chat while I'm presenting. So we're just going to have to wing this, as they say. So what I'm going to do is play the call and then introduce the species. So if you want to guess, and then maybe we can have a roundup at the end to see how many you got right. So let's start with species number 1. So this is a pretty common species. I'm sure you get it up in your area quite often. So there's the chat. Okay. So this is your chance to guess before we move on. And the answer is great horned owl. So whoever guessed got that right. Hold on, I just have to get rid of there it goes. Okay. So Yeah, great horned owl, which is the second heaviest owl in Ontario. It's bigger than a crow, but smaller than a Canada geese. So quite a large bird, actually. They're very secretive. So if you're trying to find your first great horned owl, you'll realize that it's a lot of trouble. The trick for great horned owl is to look in the late winter, early spring for stick nests in woodlands adjacent to fields. At least in our area, that's the kind of habitat that they like. They usually steal a nest from a red-tailed hawk that nested the year before. So if you know where there's some red-tailed hawks nesting, watch those nests in around February. Used to be Valentine's Day, I would say, start looking at Valentine's Day, but as our climate gets warmer, it seems to be earlier and earlier. And we even in our area have some great horned owls that are on the nest in January now. And they'll also nest in cavities, so they're not restricted to stick nests. And what can be cuter than a baby owl peeking out? This is obviously a cavity nest, and he's peeking around looking at his environment. There's an adult and a babe here, and you can see how big the babes are by the time they're perched on the side of the nest. Great horned owls in particular are monogamous, so they usually pair for life. And often if the partner is lost somehow, killed or died of old age, they may not remate. So that may be it for them. They average 2 eggs, but more if food is abundant. Incubation is an average of 33 to 35 days. So again, big eggs, takes a while for the babes to develop in the eggs. And then they fledge in 5 or 6 weeks. So, it takes 2 months of the female sitting on the nest to at least before they can fledge these babes off. That's the reason for starting so early in the nesting season. They have the most diverse prey profile of any raptor in the Americas, mostly mammals, birds, reptiles, amphibians, insects, but they are a fierce predator and are known to kill osprey, peregrine falcons, and of course, one of their favorite birds to hate, American crows. And the hate works the other way too. They love rabbits, so that's a pretty big prey, and rodents like rats and mice. Do you know what their favorite food is? And I'll give you a second to look that up in the chat, or to answer that in the chat. No, I'm not seeing anything in the chat. So I'll give you another 5 seconds. Well, I'll tell you what, the last thing you want to do if you find a roadkill great horned owl, or an owl that's died of some other some other reason, you definitely do not want to put it in your car, because their favorite food is skunk. And I can tell you from a friend's experience that putting that dead owl in your car to try and get it to ROM or some other place where they might be able to use it is not a good idea if it's been eating skunk. Another tip to know too is that Kay McKeever, who was founded the Owl Foundation in Vineland, and actually wrote multiple books about owls, including several children's books, which are absolutely delightful. I know here we have many of them in our libraries, but I hope you can get some of them up at where you live, Granny's Gang, and a few others that are just delightful. But she also wrote the manual for owl care and in the whole world, and it's actually been translated into 40 different languages. So she was the leading expert in owl care and rehabilitation from injuries. But she used to say, when she introduced people to the tours at the Owl Foundation, that to never stare at an owl, because that was the equivalent of punching them in the nose. And you can see both of these, the adult on the left side and the juvenile in the nest on the right side, are doing the stare. And that is a very aggressive move for them. They're not very happy with the fact that you are on their invading their space. And this is a very unhappy owl staring back at you. Okay, quiz 2. And another call. So this is a pretty common owl in our area. I think it probably is in your area as well. I'll give you 5 or 10 seconds to make a guess at this owl. And it looks like there's a couple of correct answers here. Yes, Eastern Screech Owl is right. So they have both 2 songs, the trill and the whinny. And let's move on. One thing that's really interesting about Eastern Screech Owls is that they are a small owl that is about robin size. And even more interesting is that you can put up boxes for them. And with the right habitat, which isn't much, they'll nest in urban areas, but they need healthy food. So if there's a lot of people who, for instance, spray insecticides or pesticides, there won't be insects, and that's what they love to eat. So you certainly don't want to increase their toxic load when they're eating insects. So if you have a nice healthy yard with no chemicals on it, put up a box, because you never know, you might get one nesting or maybe even roosting in it. They lay their eggs in the spring. The eggs are laid at 2-day intervals. So this is always really interesting when I lead tours, because if the babes are, if you see, sometimes what happens is the nest is destroyed, or the parents, or one of the parents dies, and the young have to go to the facility to be raised by other screech owls, so that they know that they're a screech owl. But you'll see, especially in the bigger owls, that the babes will be different sizes, because the eggs will hatch on different days. The average clutch size is 4.5. Average incubation is 4.5 weeks, and an average 4 weeks to fledge. So a couple of months there. What will happen, and the mortality in the first year is 70%. So when they lay that many eggs, what happens is, if there's not enough food, then somebody smaller might get bumped out of the nest. So that's just nature's way of making sure that the strong survive. And if there's not enough food, then the smaller ones might not make it. This is somebody, a friend of mine, who has a box that regularly gets nesting Eastern Screech Owls, and you can see the egg that she's laying on. She's laying on 2 eggs there in the picture, but probably more. And she has a webcam that she leaves in there, and she's able to watch as the owl sits on the eggs and then raises the young, which is pretty exciting. The most interesting thing about screech owls is a camouflage. They really choose trees where it's very, very difficult to see them. Another really interesting thing about screech owls is that there's 3 color morphs. So this is a red color morph. Often you see the gray, they're the most numerous, but every once in a while you get a gray bird that mates with a red bird, and you'll get brown, which is really interesting. And then you get funny combinations like this one, which is kind of reddish brownish at the top and gray at the bottom. So lots of odd little combinations like that. We're seeing that we're getting more and more red morphs in our area. They used to be further west, but they seem to be moving in. So we're starting to see some of these combinations here, as well as just the full red ones too. And here's another example of the camouflage. So no wonder they're hard to find. So what you want to do is, as you're driving along in the country, is look for these nest holes, especially in the spring, but also in the winter too. They'll sit out on a sunny day in the winter, and try and warm up. And you're looking for this white on the chest and underneath, kind of on their throat, to pop out at you as you're driving around looking at all these knot holes. Okay, here we go for quiz number 3. They're getting a little harder now. I'll give you 10 seconds to guess what this one might be. Don't often hear it, so that's the thing about some of these calls. So you don't often hear them. Okay, I'm not seeing any guesses here, so let's move on. Oopsies. There. So this is a short-eared owl. It's medium size, about the size of a crow. Pretty exciting to see. They're species of special concern in Ontario and Canada. I know I've seen some historic records of there being flocks of 100 along by Vineland and Grimsby in Niagara, from 100 years ago. So they used to be quite numerous. There was more fields that they like to use for nesting and hunting. They do like to hunt they will hunt during the day. So especially during nesting season and cloudy days, you can sometimes see them during the day, but they really like the just before dusk and even in the dawn. They have a really unusual moth-like wing beat that really distinguishes them. So when you see them at dusk, you can tell them right away just because of that unusual moth-like beat. They like the same habitat as northern harriers. So if you have a field that is regularly used by northern harriers, try going out and looking at dusk to see if you can see any short-eared owls. That's the kind of habitat, that kind of grassland, but with maybe a wet area on it. That's what they like to nest in and hunt in. So stunner. They have trouble breeding them so the Owl Foundation has 2 functions. One is to, the basic function is to take in injured owls and try and save them and rehabilitate them for release, which can be a long process, but they have a lot of success, which is great. The second function is if the injured owls can't be released, but they're well enough to survive, that is, their injuries aren't fatal or painful, then they'll try and introduce them into their breeding program, which is very tricky in itself. There's a lot of complications. Owls, you just don't put a male and a female owl together and say, go ahead, make some eggs. It can be very complicated. There's a lot of female choice and other factors going into it. The problem with the short-eared owls is that they need a very high cage because the male does a flight display. So they've been unable to breed short-eared owls in captivity so far, although they have a pretty good success rate with most of the other species that are in Ontario. Their prey are small rodents, but they take birds even as large as a tern or a gull. They nest on the ground and lay from 1 to 11 eggs. They may double nest if the season's long enough and there's enough food. They incubate for 3 to 5 weeks, and the juveniles stay in the nest for another 2 weeks. And when they're nesting and feeding babes, they are active during the day and the evening. Okay, let's move on to species number 4. Yes, the mating call. Isn't that just crank some females' gears? Not so much that call. Any guesses? 5 more seconds. Okay, it's very difficult to hear these owls. They are, excuse me, around, but you don't often see them. They're very, very secretive. So that was a long-eared owl. They're a medium-sized owl, about the size of a crow. What's remarkable about them is their facial discs, which help for them to hear the birds. So it's funneling the sound to their ears, which are actually on the sides of their heads. And again, they're not directly opposite each other. One's higher, one's lower. And it's good to know that the ears, what we see as ears or ear tufts in most owls, are not actually ears. They're just for display. They're ornamental. They have no function. So the ears are actually on the side of the head, covered up by feathers. And you can see in this case, the disc is directing the sound right into their ears so they can hear better. And it's more three-dimensional hearing. They can actually adjust the feathers in those facial discs so it can focus on different distances. And they're really talented at locating prey under snow, grass, and plant cover. They also like to elongate themselves when they get scared. So if you see a long-eared owl, which they're very sensitive species, they don't like to be disturbed. And you can see this, the look on the face of this owl, it does look kind of like it's frightened, and it's elongating itself to try and look like a branch of the tree. They like to steal crow nests rather than build their own. The average clutch size is 5 eggs. They incubate for 27.5 days. They like to communal roost in the winter. So where we might find a pair nesting, we may find 5 or 6 long-eared owls in the winter. They like to eat rodents, small mammals, and birds, and they're extremely timid, but their hoots can be heard up to 1 kilometer away. How many long-eared owls in this photo? I'll give you a few seconds to answer this. Any guesses? You can see how cryptic they are. I do have a zoom lens. I took this picture myself, although I'll introduce you to some of the photographers of the other birds, but I was quite a ways away. I have a Nikon P1000, so I can zoom from quite a distance and not disturb the birds. No guesses. Okay. When I took this photo, we thought there were 2. When we looked at it afterwards, we saw there were actually 3. So there's the ears for this one. Can you see my pointer? Not sure. The ears for this one and the ears for that one. And 1 squirrel. Yes, good ID. Okay, quiz number 5. Oh, hold on. I have to say I love owls, but I just love that call. This is a bird that has started recently nesting in the Niagara area, so it's been a thrill to go out some nights and hear it calling. And yes, I think just about everybody, everybody got it right. Barred owl, what a beautiful bird. So we're really quite thrilled. This is just within the last, I would say, 7 years that we've had barred owl nesting in the Niagara area. So that's been a change. What we're seeing is some northern species moving south, which is very, very interesting. I'm not quite sure what that's all about, but there you go. It's a larger owl. It's larger than the crow, but smaller than a Canada goose. They like mature forests, especially wet forests. They will use a nest box, and the food they like is mostly mammals, but they'll eat birds, reptiles, amphibians, and they will get eaten. Great horned owls will prey on a lot of different owls. So if you're out listening for owls and you hear a great horned, you probably won't hear too many other species of owls. Just another beautiful picture of one of our Niagara barred owls. And a video I took. Just bear with me because I didn't edit this properly, but I wanted to see this because it's pretty cool. Again, I have a zoom camera, so I wasn't very close. You can see he's not bothered too much by my presence, but he knows I'm here. Okay, oops, hold on. Okay, next species. Not a species you hear vocalizing too often, but if you do come for a tour at the Val Foundation, you'll certainly hear this call. That's their stress call, warning of monsters, and that would be people in their presence. Any guesses? It's not a call you hear very often, either of them. Okay, let's move on. So snowy owls, the largest, the heaviest owl in Southern Ontario, larger than a crow, not largest by size, but the heaviest, heavier than a great horned owl. Every once in a while we'll get eruption years. There's still not sure why, but they think it's a result perhaps of a food abundance during the summer, during the breeding period, and that many of the young survive. So remember, I was saying that there is some mortality if there isn't enough food, but then the opposite happens too. If there's enough food, then a lot of the young will survive, but then there's not enough food in the winter for them, so they come further south. So in our area, we look for them in large fields, airports, lakes, anything that resembles the tundra, they seem to really love, especially if there's a lot of ducks or other sources of food that they can eat. Unfortunately, because they have no knowledge of people, they're often hit by cars, or they may even eat poisoned rodents, because here rats are becoming more common and people are poisoning them. And of course, if an owl gets hold of something like that, it can be really serious for them and could result in their death. They're diurnal, so they like to hunt at all hours. The really interesting thing about snowy owls is that you can actually tell the sex if you're an experienced birder or technician just by looking at the coloration of them. So we're going to work from the left side. So this is an adult male, subadult male, subadult male, subadult male, subadult male, female, female, female. So what you're looking at are the bands on the tail. See how wide these bands are compared to the male. Lots more barring here and darker barring. Yeah, so it's possible to sex them and even age them to a certain extent in the field. So there's a beautiful female. Okay, next species. Any guesses for this bird? It is highly migratory. Yes, everybody's got the right answer here. Northern saw-whet owl. So this is an interesting owl, at least in our area, because we do get them in migration, and sometimes they will overwinter. So we start looking for them in the fall. They like to hang out close to water. and they like white cedar down here. They're the smallest owl in southern Ontario, about the size of a robin. And we even have a few breeding records in Niagara, which is amazing. Again, they're migratory, but also winter resident down here on occasion. They're only 7.7 inches or 20 centimeters long, and they weigh hardly anything, 100 grams or 3.6 ounces. Once the eggs hatch, the male looks after the babes. And how adorable. I mean, how cute is that? It's just adorable. But you can see that this owl is very scared. It's doing the stare, which indicates that it's trying to be aggressive, trying to look as big as it can and as scary as it can. So our owl is highly disturbed. And then it's time to move back and go on your way. Get your picture and then go on your way and leave that poor owl alone. Another strategy they have, because they have yellow eyes, is to squint. So when you see an owl doing this, like a northern saw-whet owl, it's squinting, and it's trying to pretend you can't see it. And again, highly stressed. So time to back off and move away. Just a few of the rare owls that we might see in our area. They might be a bit more common in your area. Great gray owls. They're the largest in Ontario by size. They're monsters. They're really big, larger than a crow, but smaller than a Canada geese. They're the world's largest species by length. And their wingspan can exceed 60 inches. The average adult weighs 2.84 pounds or 1,290 grams. Wow. It's so heavy, right? You could probably pick it up in one hand. And you can see that the female weighs more than the male. And here's the vocalization. I believe that's a courtship call. And can never have enough pictures of great gray owls. Again, getting the stare. So it's time for people to not take 100,000 pictures. Just get in a couple of really nice shots like this and move on and leave the owl alone. Northern hawk owl, we only have 1 or 2 records in Niagara. It's generally non-migratory. But it is active during the day. When I started birding, it was the first owl that I saw because I was living in Ottawa at the time and it was winter. So that was pretty exciting to have that as my first owl. Likes eating small rodents or mammals and birds. And here is the call. Do that again. Okay. Oops, hold on. I lost my screen. Oh. Reem, I've got a problem. I can't find my screen. Thank you. Okay, so let's move on. Yeah, just a stunning owl that looks more like a hawk, a forest hawk, than it does an owl. So it's a very attractive bird, getting harder and harder to find, probably more up in your area. But like I said, this is a photo that K.O. Roy took of the Niagara bird. And I think there's only been 1 or 2 records of northern hawk owl in our area. Boreal owl, we had one in January at Grimsby, and it was really exciting. A lot of people went to see this owl, and it was heavily disturbed. It's about the size of a robin. The female boreal owl is much larger than the male, sometimes 2 times heavier than the male. Boreal owls have a large square head without ear tufts, and they have a stocky body and short tail. I'm not going to play the song because that seems to mess me around for my show. It was a beautiful, attractive bird, and it seemed to tolerate some people, but then it would disappear for days at a time. So obviously it was sitting tight. Well, as hundreds of people poured in to see this bird, and then it would disappear. So it probably had enough, and it didn't want to fly during the day because they're scared of predators or even acknowledging that it's there. So that poor bird was stressed out, but did stay for months and months. And my dream bird to see in Ontario is a barn owl. It's a medium-sized owl that is extremely rare. There are a few in Ontario, but there's no breeding pairs anymore. They relied on being able to stay in warm barns that had maybe cows that kept the barn warm over the winter because their legs are not feathered. And so they basically, their little legs just freeze without some kind of heat to keep them warm throughout the winter. It's about the size of a crow. It's endangered in Ontario and Canada, but it's one of the most widespread species of owl worldwide. Just stunning. So every once in a while, there is a pair at the Owl Foundation. Every once in a while, they'll be sitting out and we get to actually see it, which it's so different looking and beautiful. So it's a real treat. Truth be known, that's why I volunteer there, is I get to see these owls every year, which is great. So how do you find owls? There's a lot of different tricks depending on the species. You can look for the stick nests, like I was saying about great horned owls in January and February. And just look for the ear tufts. So when you see the nest in January, February, you're just going to see ear tufts sticking out of the nest. And as the babes are hatched and get bigger, then she'll be sitting higher and higher on the nest. And then eventually you'll see the babes come out on the edge of the nest. You can put up boxes for some species and check the cavities. We saw the great horned owl sitting in a babe sitting in a cavity. So watch those cavities. Same as the screech owl, keep a lookout for those highly camouflaged birds sitting in a knot in a tree. Look in the appropriate habitats like field or grasslands for short-eared owls. Another technique in the woods is to look for whitewash, like on the tree on the right side. So that is how they basically pee. It's uric acid and it comes out as this white wash. It's not like sap. Sap won't look as white and brilliant white as the owl pee. And another thing is to look on the ground for pellets, which are fascinating, actually, if you find a pellet. And with avian flu, I don't recommend, picking it up in your bare hands. You probably want to pick it up with some gloves or a plastic bag. But if you were to take it apart, you would find little bones. And there's even some sites on the web that will help you identify the prey in owl pellets. So it's pretty cool. And another technique is also listen to crows and other birds mobbing, which means they're making a lot of noise. They're really upset. There's a bunch of them. And often what they're doing is mobbing an owl, because an owl is a predator, especially for their young birds. Please, there are so few owls now, and they're steadily declining, especially in our area where there's a lot of development pressure. So don't disturb them when they're nesting. It's really important that we try and respect their space and let them do their thing. So don't approach migratory birds too closely. Some of them are not used to people, and because they're camouflaged, they may remain still, but they're still highly stressed out. And so it's not good for them. It keeps them from hunting and resting, which they need to do, and it could result in injury or death. It's so tempting. I know I love owls too. It's so tempting to get closer to them, but we're stressing them out. So try not to get, try and stay at least 100 feet from them or more. I've been able to get great viewing experiences and photos just from staying in my car and using that as like my camouflage. Again, disturbing them uses their energy, and they're not doing what they should be doing. If they're disturbed or baited, they may fly into traffic and get hit, or another thing for the smaller owls is they may get mobbed or by other species like crows and even killed by them. So here are the signs of stress. We saw them in a few of the pictures. The stare. They know you're there, they're watching you, and they're scared. They may actually start hooting or barking. Clacking of the bill. I know that I had to rescue a eastern screech owl a couple of years ago, and it was just a juvenile, and it had some minor injuries, as it turned out, when I took it to the Owl Foundation. But as soon as I picked it up, it started clacking its bill at me. And I said to the person who had found it, I said, I think this owl will be okay. You did a good thing calling for the Owl Foundation to come and get it. And indeed, it was fine. I called it Brat because I had it in a box as I was taking it to the Owl Foundation, and it got out of the box, and I'm driving along the highway with this owl sitting, giving me the stare. It's good to phone the Owl Foundation if you do have an owl that's stressed out or injury, because they will either send somebody who's skilled at getting it and recovering it, or they will tell you how to do it. So just don't assume you can pick them up on your own. You really need to be very careful with them. They're very sensitive, and they can easily be injured, or the injuries that they have could be further aggravated. The tall, thin posture, like we saw with the long-eared owls, so they'll try and disguise themselves. They raise their ear tufts, so that's another sign of them being scared, and the squinting behavior as well to hide their yellow eyes. So should you bait or not to bait? And the Owl Foundation says never, under any circumstances. I know it turned out to be a big problem in our area, and I know that several snowy owls were injured and killed because of the baiting. And it's also a problem when people use playback to try and get good pictures or get them to come close. The Owl Foundation did a survey in 2007 of all their owls that they received that year. And the biggest by far is being hit by car. So 30%, 37% of the owls that year, and that's pretty common, were hit by car. The second most highest reason for them receiving owls is the babes are orphans. So a tree might get cut down and the nest falls on the ground, and the babes have to retrieve because the nest is gone, and they're not young. They're not old enough to survive without the nest, without the parents coming back to the nest. And there's a multitude of other factors, hitting windows, other collisions, parasites, entanglement, so mostly human related. So here's another few tips for how you can help owls. Don't throw your organic waste, like your apple core, out the car window into the ditch, because what happens is the mice are attracted to that apple core. The owls come in at night and may cross the road to get the mouse, and bang, collides with the car because they're not watching for cars. You can create backyard habitat. You put up a box. Become politically aware. Stop development of critical habitats for owls, especially grasslands. It's becoming quite a problem in our area, and become involved with organizations that preserve the habitat for owls. This is my most exciting owl experience. This was my backyard, and I heard some mobbing behavior, and this is what I got to see. Oops, hold on. That didn't work. Try this. So I heard all this commotion in the backyard. I got my scope out. It was just getting dark, and I was able to capture this through my scope. So I was quite a distance away. The owls are doing that funny little dance because they're trying to get a 3D picture of what's going on. You can hear the robins and everybody else going crazy, and you can also hear one of the parents vocalizing to the young. So it was quite a treat for me to have that happen right in my backyard. I want to thank the photographers, K.O. Roy. I think a lot of you know K.O. He's one of the authors of Niagara Birds, and he's been birding for many years. He's now 90 years old, and he still goes out birding all the time. So he's a really amazing guy and a very good friend. Ron Goodrich, who's a member of our club down here and a photographer in Fort Erie, and Don Peronowski is also a member of our club. So my battle was to save Waverly Woods and Fort Erie, and we just had the hearing for that. I also am one of the founders of Birds on the Niagara, which is a birding festival we have in February every year, and it's international. So we work with people in the US along the Niagara River to have a festival. So come and join us. A lot of our events are online, and you can see some presentations from previous years by going to Birds on the Niagara on the web. And there's a great show from last year that Jeff Jones from the Owl Foundation did about owls. So you might want to check that out. And of course, the amazing Owl Foundation, where so many owls have been rescued and saved and released back into the wild. So that's my presentation. Thank you so much for your patience. I hope I wasn't too long. And if you have any questions, I'd be more than happy to answer them at this time.